Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the April 2022 Ordinary Council meeting. We acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of this land, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and their elders past and present. I would like to advise everyone that the audio of this meeting is being live streamed to YouTube. I request everyone to please turn off your mobile phones. I remind you that audio recording of the meeting proceedings, any recording actually, and photography within the chamber is prohibited unless prior approval has been granted, and councillors and city officers are reminded to disclose any declarations of financial interests and interests affecting impartiality and are requested to activate their microphones during the meeting. So that brings us to item 1, which is the declaration of opening. Welcome everyone. I declare this meeting open at 1 minute past 6 p.m. Item 2 is a disclaimer. The City of South Perth disclaims any liability for any loss arising from any person or body relying on any statement, discussion, recommendation or decision made during this meeting. Item 3 is announcements from the presiding member, that's me. There's no such announcements this evening. And item 4 is attendances. Item 4.1 is apologies. I haven't received any apologies for this evening. Item 4.2 is approved leaves of absence. And Councillor Jennifer Navard has an approved leave of absence for the period of 23 March 2024 to 25 April 2024 inclusive. Item 5 is declarations of interest. CEO Mike Bradford has declared an impartiality interest in item 10.5.1 as this item relates to my contract of employment. Mayor Greg Milner, that's me, I've declared a financial and proximity interest in item 12.1 as one of my campaign donors owns the Coles local site on the corner of Anstey Street and Angelo Street in South Perth. And CEO Mike Bradford has declared an impartiality interest in item 15.1.1 as this item relates to my contract of employment. Councillors, does anyone else have any interests that they wish to declare this evening? I'm going to take that as a no. Okay. Item 6 is public question time. Item 6.1 is responses to previous public questions taken on notice and questions received at the meeting held on the 26th of March 2024 were taken on notice. The questions and the responses can be found in the appendix of the agenda to this meeting. Item 6.2 is public question time, and I open public question time at 3 minutes past 6 p.m. We've received 4 written submissions prior to tonight's meeting. So to begin with, I'd like to invite Ms. Margaret Davies-Slate of Como. If you'd like to come to the microphone, welcome to you. And we look forward to your questions.
My questions are related to childcare centres in South Perth and our district. And the background to this is a proposal for a 2-storey child daycare centre on the corner of Rari Avenue and Murray Street, Como, is currently being considered. And as my husband and I live close by, we've been notified of the proposal and given the opportunity to comment, which we appreciate, and we've made some comments which we've submitted. We understand that development applications such as this go to the Development Assessment Panel for approval, and the City of South Perth provides a report on the proposal for consideration by the DAP. We're aware that the DAP recently approved a child daycare centre to be built in Birdwood Avenue, Como, and this one will have the capacity to cater for 86 children. The proposed centre on the corner of Rari Avenue and Murray Street, near where I live, would cater for 78 children. We understand that applications for development approval of childcare premises in South Perth are guided by the Childcare Premises Local Planning Policy. This policy includes a requirement that development applications include information on the level of existing or proposed services in the locality and proximity to other centres and population catchments for the proposed centre. So I've got 3 questions. Shall I do them one at a time? Or?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So the first one. Is there a policy or plan which sets out how the information provided under the above requirement, which I've just cited, is assessed in relation to whether the application will be approved? And if so, does that carry weight when the DAP considers a development application?
Thank you for the question. Michelle, can I send that to you?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So there are various pieces of legislation and planning instruments which the application is assessed against, including Planning and Development Local Planning Schemes Regulations 2015, City's Local Planning Scheme number 7, and various local planning policies. The relevance to the application determines the weight which the DAP will give in considering the application. The local planning policy childcare premises was updated by Council in November 2023 to include consideration of service levels, and this will be considered as part of the assessment of the application. The City will be providing its assessment against relevant planning consideration and the instruments in the Responsible Authority report to the DAP. So we will effectively do an assessment against all of the relevant pieces of legislation and applicable planning frameworks and present them for the DAP to consider.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. And any second question?
Right, so it's continuing along this theme, I suppose. Is there a policy or plan, and probably you've already answered this, I'm not quite sure, setting out how many child daycare centres there should be in the city of South Perth, taking into account commercial viability and amenity considerations? And if so, does that carry weight when the DAP considers a development application?
Thank you. Ms Shaw?
Thank you. The short answer is no. The expanded version is that under the planning regulations that I mentioned earlier, Clause 67.2 provides all the matters that need to be considered when we're assessing a development application. One of the sections within that section provides for the potential loss of any community service or benefit resulting from the development. However, that section also expressly states that this will exclude the potential loss that may result from economic competition between new and existing businesses. So there's an existing High Court decision that has determined that the threat of competition to existing businesses is not what's known as a relevant planning consideration in the assessment of the application, and it can only be considered if there's a prospect that there's a reduction in available community facilities. The West Australian Planning Commission has further expanded on this and clarified in its draft position statement on childcare centres that an applicant does not have to demonstrate that there is sufficient demand for the facility. However, it provides the ability for the local government to consider this in the assessment of the application. And so, as I previously advised, when Council revised its local planning policy on childcare centres, it required consideration of service levels as part of an additional provision to that local planning policy. And so the City will be giving consideration to that in its assessment of the application itself, but it's likely to relate to the impact of service levels on the amenity as a result of the development rather than commercial competition.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. And your final question, Ms Davies-Slatt?
I think possibly you've answered it now. I'll read it out, but I think it might have been answered. If there's no policy or plan relating to the number of child daycare centres which may be approved, will the council consider what would be an appropriate number of child care centres to accommodate need, taking into account commercial viability and amenity considerations?
Thank you. Ms Shaw?
Thank you. So effectively, as I've previously advised, but we will be expanding on the amenity section as well to consider other associated amenity impacts such as traffic, noise and parking and the like, and providing an assessment of that in the Responsible Authority report to the DAP.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Shaw, and thank you, Ms Davies-Slatt, for your questions. I'd now like to invite Mr Shane Sherman of Como. Welcome to you. If you'd like to come to the microphone, we're looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, Councillor, staff. Of course, this continuation of the same issue, I suppose. I guess in preamble from my point of view, it's primarily about traffic and safety. But in relation to why I'm asking this, I've only got the one question, is that the childcare centre at Birdwood Avenue did not appear to have been, the council did not appear to have been given the opportunity to consider the views of the residents. As I understand, it was 96% of responses were objections. And as a result, did not advocate on behalf of the concerned residents when the application went before the DAP. It's therefore lacked transparency, residential consultation appeared inconsequential and made the process appear to be a foregone conclusion. So my question is, as a consequence of the manner in which the City progressed the DAP consideration of Birdwood Avenue, will the Council call for the Responsible Authority report being prepared by City officers in relation to 76 childcare premises application to develop 78 Ryrie Avenue, Como, and fully consider the report, application and objection by residents? Again, as I understand it, there's 96% against, and following which put forward the Council's view on the application to the DAP.
Thank you for the question. Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So unlike other types of decisions, planning applications are quasi-judicial decisions, and the submissions that are received, it's not a poll in terms of how we consider the submissions. So even though there may be circumstances where there is a large percentage in opposition, what the city is required to do is to consider whether the submissions themselves are relevant planning considerations. And so with the Birdwood application, the city reviewed the submissions on the matter and provided the key themes in the Responsible Authority report. So in reviewing those submissions, it was quite obvious that there were a lot of concerns to do with traffic, loss of amenity trees and the like. The makeup of the Development Assessment Panel itself is established under the separate DAP regulations and includes the 3 technical experts and 2 local government elected members. The elected members on the DAP can represent the views of the community in considering the applications, but obviously given the makeup of the DAP panels themselves, they are outnumbered in terms of the decision-making process. And the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage has previously provided advice to councillors in respect to considering responsible authority reports at council prior to being considered by the DAP. And their advice is to effectively that for those elected members that are also on the Development Assessment Panel to avoid participating in voting at council in relation to a DAP application to avoid any impartiality interest on the matter.
Thank you, Ms Shaw, and thank you, Mr Sherman, for the question.
Thank you.
I'd now like to invite Mr John Bassett of Como. Welcome to you if you'd like to come to the microphone, and we look forward to your questions.
Good evening. It seems that childcare centres are the topic for the evening. Council recently provided advice to the DAP on the application for a childcare centre at 5 Birdwood Avenue. When the application was made to Council, it was refused on a range of issues, but with little change to the application, Council then recommended the same proposal to the DAP. In the submissions from at least 2 of the residents, technical details were provided as to the reason why the application should be refused on noise issues. So my first question is, considering the detailed report that I provided as an acoustician, why was it that the only thing conveyed to the DAP was that a handful of residents had noise concerns?
Thank you for the question. Ms Shaw?
Yes, thank you, and certainly not to discredit your professional background at all. The DAP's required to consider the information that's been submitted by the applicant in support of the development application. So the applicant provided an acoustic report by Herring Store Acoustics, which was then assessed by the city and provided to the DAP as an attachment for its consideration. Noise was a matter that was certainly raised in a number of submissions, and we see it quite frequently with applications for childcare centres. So as a result of that, the city then recommended 2 conditions related to noise, which were thankfully accepted by the DAP, which included confirmation of the recommendations that were provided in the acoustic report by the applicant, ensuring that they're implemented prior to the occupation of the development, as well as the provision of a noise management plan. And that was more to do with the ongoing management of the facility after it's been constructed for the life of the development to the city's satisfaction.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. And your second question, Mr Bassett?
Second question, at the DAP meeting, a council officer stated that the council had relied on internal expertise in assessing the aspects of the proposal. In relation to the acoustics aspects, what expertise is there on council and what qualification do they hold?
Thank you for the question. Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So the city has qualified environmental health officers that undertake the assessments for our acoustic reports and our noise management plans in accordance with the Environmental Protection Noise Regulations. The environmental health officers are appointed as authorised persons under sections 87 and 88 of the Environmental Protection Act 1986. And they need to have completed training, education and various tertiary studies and be recognised by the Department of Water and Environmental Regulation to be able to hold that position and to undertake those assessments. So all of the city's environmental health officers have those relevant qualifications and have been endorsed by DWER in that respect. So they are suitably qualified to review the pre and post acoustic assessments provided in support of the application.
Thank you, Ms Shaw, and thank you, Mr Bassett, for the questions. I'll just take this opportunity to extend public question time for a further 15 minutes. We shouldn't need any more than that. And with that, I'd like to invite Mr. Barry Drake of South Perth to the microphone. Welcome to you, and we look forward to your questions.
My name's Barry Drake. I live at Unit 3, Number 2, Scenic Crescent, South Perth. Good evening, Mr Mayor, councillors, officers, members of the gallery, and good evening to everybody listening on YouTube. Question number 1. In August last year, I paid to the City of South Perth $73,568 in council rates. Some of this money would have gone to the maintenance of Sir James Mitchell Park. How much did Wesley College pay the City of South Perth council rates last year?
Thank you for the question. Mr. Lecoq, can I send that your way?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As a school, Wesley College is exempt from paying council rates in accordance with the Local Government Act 1995, Section 6.26. The school does, however, own some properties that are used for residential purposes, which was and are subject to rates.
Thank you, Mr. Lecoq. Your second question, Mr.
So a
Drake?
business like Wesley College doesn't pay any council rates. Okay, as long as everybody knows, thank you.
Mr. Lecoq, sorry.
Question
Mr.
number
Drake,
2.
sorry, let me finish. It's not a forum for editorialising. Please ask your questions. You'll get your answer, but I've got to be consistent and fair to everyone. No editorialising.
Question number 2. The street frontage on my properties in Scenic Crescent and Heppingstone Street in South Perth are approximately 150 metres in length, for which I've been charged by the city $99,100 for the undergrounding of the power lines. Wesley College street frontage on several streets in South Perth is many hundreds of metres. How much did the City of South Perth charge Wesley College for the undergrounding of the power lines which pass Wesley properties?
Thank you. Ms. Lecoq?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Wesley College is not situated within the boundaries of the South Perth Hurlingham Underground Power Scheme area. As such, they were not charged as part of the scheme. The school would have been part of one of the very first underground power schemes, and so charges would differ significantly and are not comparable. That scheme is more than 20 years ago.
Thank you, Mr. Lecoq. And your final question, Mr. Drake?
Question number 3. Do any of the councillors, including the Mayor, agree with me when I say the government should scrap all local councils or local governments, convert their offices and administration buildings to maternity hospitals and medical centres, assign their duties to the state governments and increase the GS2 to cover those costs?
Thank you for the question. Mr. Lecoq?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not in a position to respond on behalf of any councillor or corporately as council. However, that question is better directed via email to individual councillors.
Thank you, Mr. Lecoq, and thank you, Mr. Drake, for the questions.
Quite a respectable answer. Thank you.
Alrighty, I'm just going to check with governance to see if there's any late questions in the tray. No, there's not. Okay. In that case, I close public question time at 6:20 p.m. That brings us to item 7 on the agenda, which is confirmation of minutes and notes. Item 7.1 is minutes. Item 7.1.1 is the ordinary council meeting held on 26 March 2024. So I'm about to seek a mover and a seconder to move that the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held 26 March 2024 be taken as read and confirmed as a true and correct record. Can I have a mover, please? Councillor Coveney, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Councillors, does anyone oppose this? I want to take that as a no. In that case, I declare it carried using my powers under the standing orders. That brings us to item 7.2, which is notes of briefing. So I'm about to call for a mover and a seconder to move that council notes that the following council briefings and workshops were held. That's 7.2.1, concept briefings and workshops, and 7.2.2, the council agenda briefing dated 16 April 2024. Can I have a mover, please? Councillor Coveney, thank you, and seconded by Councillor Choi. Councillors, does anyone oppose this? I'm going to take that as a no, in which case I'll declare the motion carried using my powers under the standing orders. We move on to item 8, which is presentations. Item 8.1 is petitions. There's no petitions this evening. Item 8.2 is gifts or awards presented to council. That's nil for this evening. And item 8.3 is deputations. And no deputations were heard at the council agenda briefing held on 16 April 2024. That takes us to item 9, which is method of dealing with agenda business. I wish to advise that the following agenda item is a new report and was not presented to the council agenda briefing held 16 April 2024. That is item 10.5.1, Chief Executive Officer Key Performance Indicator Report. And I'll now seek confirmation from the Acting Chief Executive Officer, Ms. Anita Amprimo, that all the report items contained in tonight's agenda, with the exception of item 10.5.1, were discussed at the council agenda briefing. Ms. Amprimo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I confirm that is correct.
Thank you very much. So, with the exception of those items to be withdrawn for discussion, reports will be adopted by exception resolution. And by this, I mean the officer recommendation will be adopted as it is, without discussion or amendment. The following items have been withdrawn for this evening. Item 10.3.1, entitled Draft Local Planning Policy, Tree Retention, Advertising and Revocation of P350.5, Trees on Development Sites and Street Verges. The reason for that is Councillor Andre Brenda Abrandis has an amended motion. Item 10.4.3, Strategic Community Plan Minor Review. The reason for that is an absolute majority is required. Item 10.5.1, Chief Executive Officer Key Performance Indicator Report. The reason for that is it's a new report. And item 15.1.1, Independent Facilitator for Chief Executive Officer Evaluation Process 2023 to 2024. And the reason for that is Councillor Brenda Abrandis has an alternative motion. Does anyone wish to withdraw any other items for this evening? Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to withdraw 10.3.3 as I'd just like to speak to it. Thank you.
All right, so we're also withdrawing item 10.3.3, Proposed Holiday House, Lot 1, Unit 1/31 Banksia Terrace, Kensington, Section 31 reconsideration. So that's being added to the items we're withdrawing for discussion this evening. Any others, councillors? Councillor D'Souza.
10.1.1, Mr. Mayor, just a clarification question on this item.
All right, and item 10.1.1. Any others, councillors? No, okay. In that case, I'm going to call for a mover and a seconder to carry the following items by exception resolution. Those items are 10.3.2, State Development Assessment Unit, SDAU, Referral of Significant Development Application, Amendment to Development Approval, Lots 3 and 4, numbers 109 and 111, Robert Street, Como, and lots 118 and 119, numbers 469 and 471, Canning Highway, Como. Item 10.4.1, Listing of Payments, March 2024, and item 10.4.2, my bad, Monthly Financial Statements, March 2024. Can I have a mover, please? Councillor Coveney, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Councillors, does anyone oppose these items? No. Okay. Well, in that case, we'll declare those items passed unanimously. So those items have just been passed by exception resolution in accordance with clause 5.5 of the City of South Perth Standing Orders Local Law 2007, and the officer's recommendations have been accepted by council. We'll now be moving to those reports identified to be withdrawn for discussion this evening. And the first of those is item 10.1.1, entitled RFT 12 of 2023, provision of Salter Point sewer upgrade. We've got a officer recommendation before us. I haven't received any amended motions or alternative motions. I do remind councillors that there's a confidential attachment. Does anyone wish to move the officer recommendation? Councillor D'Souza, thank you. Anyone to second? Councillor Coveney. Councillor D'Souza, I know that you had a question that you wanted to ask, but the floor is yours for the moment as mover.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Nothing much to say. I think this is an important thing to do. Just to, if I can ask my question now.
I might just see if Councillor Coveney's got anything to say as seconder, but then I'll come back to you to ask a question. Councillor Coveney, nothing to say as seconder? No. Fire away, Councillor D'Souza, with your question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just clarifying that the city has, I guess, a plan in place to have appropriate signage around the site when workers, prior to work commencing and during the work. So it's a pretty high used area, just so the public know what to expect and if and when this will be out of service.
Ms Amprimo, can I send that in your direction?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will certainly make sure that the public are aware, and there will also be exclusions to the work area as well for health and safety reasons.
Thank you very much. Any further questions, councillors? Does anyone wish to speak either for or against? No. Councillor D'Souza, there's been no debate, so no need for a winding up. I'll simply put the officer recommendation to the vote. Councillors, please cast your votes. And I think I'm waiting on one more vote. Councillor Coveney, I think it might be you. There we go. That was unanimous. So thank you all, councillors. That brings us to the next item on the agenda to be discussed, which is item 10.3.1. It's draft local planning policy, tree retention, advertising and revocation of policy P350.5, trees on development sites and street verges. I'm aware that Councillor Brenda Abrandis has got an amended motion on this, but for the time being, I'll seek if anyone wants to move the officer recommendation. Councillor Coveney to second. Councillor Prendeville, Councillor Coveney, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have nothing significant to say other than this is an important policy that we should be passing. Council was pretty strong in its views when they put forward local planning policy number 7, and at last month's meeting when we voted in favour of Councillor Prendeville's motion that this be prepared. So this is significant, and I'm pleased that we're putting it forward.
Thank you, Councillor Coveney. Councillor Prendeville, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, I probably said what I needed to say when the motion came forward. This is a vital next step for us, advertising, and I urge all the councillors to help move this to the next stage. This is when we can, it gives a community the opportunity to provide feedback. So we should be grateful and very fortunate we have the power to do something in this space. So I commend the administration on the draft local planning policy and support it wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Prendeville. Councillor Brenda Abrandis, I'm aware you've got an amended motion. Did you wish to move that amended motion?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move that motion.
If you can read perhaps the changes that your amended motion makes to the officer recommendation, and then I'll see about if there's someone willing to second your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item 10.3.1, draft local planning policy, tree retention, advertising and revocation of P350.5, trees on development sites and street verges. The amendment motion is with respect to the draft local planning policy tree retention. The recommendation
still stands with regard to the council pursuant to Schedule 2, Part 2, Clause 6 of the Planning and Development Local Planning Schemes Regulations 2015 revokes P 350.5 trees on development sites and street verges. 2, pursuant to Schedule 2, Part 2, Clause 4, Subsection 1 of the Planning and Development Local Planning Schemes Regulations 2015 advertises draft local planning policy tree retention. With the following amendments to Attachment B, draft local planning policy tree retention, Section 10 definitions. The amendment definitions are with regard to regulated tree definition and tree damaging activity definition. The amendments are as follows. Regulated tree means a living tree that is 8 metres or more in height or has an average canopy diameter of at least 6 metres or has a trunk circumference of at least 1.5 metres measured 1.4 metres above the ground and is of a species that is not included in the state or local area weed register. And for the definition of tree damaging activity means E, the killing or destruction of a tree or the removal of a tree or the severing of branches, limbs, stems or trunk of a tree or the ring barking, topping or lopping of tree or of any other substantial damage to a tree.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Brandis. And just to clarify for those who are listening by YouTube, the effect of your amended motion is to, every time the phrase and/or appears, you're changing that from and/or to simply or. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thanks very much. Does anyone wish to second Councillor Brenda Brandis's amended motion? Councillor Choi and Councillor Brenda Brandis, the floor is yours for your reasons.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The reasons for these amendments are as follows. The intent of the draft local planning policy tree retention is to protect and enhance the natural environment by maintaining biodiversity, protecting and increasing tree canopy and reducing urban heat island effects. The tree protection provisions assist with the retention of vegetation, of significant mature native vegetation. The definition of a regulated tree requires clarity and should be devoid of ambiguity. The currently proposed draft policy creates uncertainty in the definition, as this provides for the different elements of the criteria to be required to be achieved together, noted as an and, whilst simultaneously the or implies for the elements are to be separately included to satisfy the definition. The current draft creates uncertainty as the definition is unclear and when would the and versus the or be applied. The definition requires amending to ensure that the definition is not open to discretionary interpretation or application. The tree damaging activity definition also creates confusion, uncertainty, and discretionary subjectivity. With the tree damaging activity definition, including an and between the criteria implies the union of the criteria needs to be satisfied in order to satisfy the definition. And this is not the case. Whilst multiple criteria can satisfy the definition, they should be considered separately in satisfying the definition and not in combination to satisfy multiple criteria together as with an and. Including and in addition to an or in this definition creates ambiguity and will lessen the desired impact of the tree damaging activity definition. Multiple criteria applying to the definition will satisfy the tree damaging activity definition with the use of the connector or between the criteria. However, applying the and connector may preclude some activities from being considered as tree damaging if all criteria aren't satisfied. The uncertainty and discretion as to the application of the tree damaging activity definition in the draft local planning policy needs to be avoided, and this proposed amendment be accepted to achieve the clarity and avoid ambiguity. The regulated tree definition should aim to achieve the highest level of protection based on the criteria of this definition. To achieve maximum tree protection, for each criterion being considered, they should be separately considered as satisfying the definition of a regulated tree. The definition should not require the criteria to be considered in conjunction with the other criteria in the definition. That is, as an and, which would consider the union of the criteria to achieve satisfying the definition. Attempting to define the regulated tree with criteria that would be considered as an and, i.e. the union, or as an or, i.e. the intersection of the criteria, creates ambiguity and uncertainty and lessens the impact of the outcomes desired to be achieved. The tree damaging activity definition should also be considered that any of the criteria individually resulting in tree damage to satisfy the definition. The intention of the draft local planning policy, tree retention, is to protect and enhance the natural environment by maintaining biodiversity, protecting and increasing tree canopy, and reducing urban heat island effects. And for this reason, I propose these amendments to ensure that there is clarity. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Councillor Choi, you're the seconder. Would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, councillors will probably recall I spoke quite at length on this item at the last council meeting, which I won't attempt to draw on again here, as this item is related to advertising of the policy as council endorsed and as drafted by the city officers. And hence the view is it's up to the public to let us know whether they want this or any other form of tree retention policy in place for the City of South Perth or not. And I'm happy to await these results and community's feedback as part of this process and via this amended motion, which I agree does clarify the definition for the public, so they understand when they receive it what they're submitting feedback on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. Does anyone wish to speak against the amended motion? Councillor Coveney.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I don't think the wording is ambiguous. As a practising solicitor of about a decade, I use and/or almost every day without issue. So with respect, I don't think it's ambiguous. That's all.
Thank you, Councillor Coveney. I suppose at this juncture I might ask a question of Ms Shaw. As far as I can tell, this amended motion seeks out the phrase and/or and replaces it with or. Does that make any difference to the interpretation of this policy whatsoever?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. No.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone who wishes to speak in favour of the amended motion who hasn't already spoken? No. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak against the amended motion? Councillor Cridland.
I think this motion doesn't understand the effect of the words and/or. In ordinary policy and law as written, because it gives the option of it either being conjunctive or disjunctive, and what removing the and does is in fact makes it more restrictive and more confusing, and certainly less certain. I have absolutely no difficulty understanding what it means at the moment, but if someone was to have a look at the fact that the council had removed the words and// before or, they would then take it that the council had formed the view that, for example, in respect of 2A, that council had determined that a regulated tree would no longer include a tree that is 8 metres or more high and also had an average canopy diameter of at least 6 metres. And I'm sure that's not what council wants to do, but that's what the result of this would be to a reader who looked at this amendment. So I just think that this amendment is fundamentally misconceived.
Thank you, Councillor Cridland. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak in favour of the amended motion who hasn't spoken? Is there anyone else who wishes to speak against who hasn't spoken? I might say a few words, although I think Councillor Coveney and Councillor Quinlan have aptly summed it up. I'm not real sure why this amended motion is before us. At best, one might be able to say it's perhaps a stylistic amendment, but stylistic amendments aren't the role of this council. We put policy to the officers for drafting. I thought it was pretty clear when I read it. I don't think this amended motion, well, we know it doesn't make any substantive change really, subject to what Councillor Quinlan has had to say to the officer recommendation. I don't think it adds any value. I think we're better off just going with the officer recommendation as it is. But that's all I'll say. Does anyone else wish to speak either for or against the amended motion? No? Councillor Brenda Brandis, you have 5 minutes to wind up if you would like to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the intent of the amendment is to ensure that the definition of a regulated tree achieves the highest level of protection based on the criteria in the definition. So to achieve the highest maximum tree protection for each criteria being considered, the criteria should be considered separately to satisfy the definition of a regulated tree. And for that reason, each of the criteria being considered should be considered as an or. The and creates confusion. The and creates the ambiguity as to whether the different criteria need to be considered in addition to each other. The highest level of tree protection we could give in the definition of a regulated tree is ensuring that each of the criteria are considered independently and alone. And by looking at parts A, B, and C, by looking at the tree height, by looking at the tree canopy, or by looking at the trunk circumference, we are looking at each of these separately as components, as one of those features or the other are actually satisfying the definition of a regulated tree. For that reason, it's actually really quite important to remove the ambiguity and not have and or. The uncertainty with regard to a definition like this does create frustration within the community as to whether they should be applying it in unison or separately and individually in determining whether a tree is actually a regulated tree. This actually sets the higher benchmark. This is what we should be trying to achieve, that each individual component can be separately used to determine a regulated tree. Likewise, with tree damaging activity as well, whilst not as important because any of these features in here could be considered tree damaging, but separately and independently, each of those lines is a tree damaging activity. When we proposed amendments to LPS 7, we did consider tree canopy and we also did consider height. And we considered that either of those components would actually qualify with regard to the tree considering protection. And we used the connector or. We didn't use and. So if we use and between any of these criterion, we actually need to consider that they should be considered together. For these reasons, and for the maximum impact on tree retention, I put forward to you tonight amendments that hopefully you'll consider appropriate with regard to our depleting trees. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Brandis. Councillors, I'll now put the amended motion to the vote. We're not voting on the officer recommendation. We're not voting on the substantive motion. We're voting on Councillor Brenda Brandis's amended motion. So with that, councillors, please cast your votes. All right, so Councillor Brenda Brandis's amended motion has failed 2 votes to 6. For those who are listening via YouTube, the votes were as follows. Here we are. So those who voted in favour were Councillor Brenda Brandis and Councillor Choi. Those who voted against were Councillor Quidland, Councillor Waugh, Councillor De Souza, Councillor Prendeville, Councillor Coveney and myself, Mayor Milner. Okay, so we're returning to the substantive motion, which is the officer recommendation. Does anyone wish to speak to the officer recommendation who hasn't already spoken on the substantive motion? That's a no. With that in mind, Councillor Coveney, anything to say by way of winding up?
Nothing further.
All right. So in that case, I'm putting the officer recommendation, the unamended officer recommendation to the vote. Councillors, please cast your votes. And that was unanimous. Thank you, councillors. Okay, we now move on to the next item to be withdrawn for discussion this evening. That is item 10.3.3, entitled Proposed Holiday House, Lot 1, Unit 1, 31 Banksia Terrace, Kensington, Section 31 reconsideration. We have an officer recommendation before us. I haven't received an amended motion or an alternative motion. I understand that Councillor Waugh wanted to speak to this one, but I'll begin by asking if anyone wants to move the officer recommendation. Councillor Prendeville, anyone to second? Councillor Coveney, Councillor Prendeville, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Not a lot to say. This has come back to us for reconsideration. And I think the biggest thing for me is impact on the city and administration financially, which is outlined in the comments. So I will be supporting this through. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Prendeville. Councillor Coveney, anything to say?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I share Councillor Prendeville's view in relation to it costing an estimated $20,000 to litigate. Notwithstanding, I do have issues with the application itself. My view of these fights are better had in a few months' time and we have a stronger policy in place. That's all.
Thank you, Councillor Coveney. Councillors, does anyone wish to speak against the officer recommendation? Councillor Waugh.
Thank you, Mayor Milner. I'm just speaking to say that firstly this proposal was to change from a single house to a holiday house under our new LPS 7. At the time of the refusal by council, the approval was considered under the TPS 6 and it has been brought back with some amendments as a result of the outcome of mediation in the tribunal, and I'm very grateful for those amendments. By way of clause 67.2 of the regulations, the city is to have due regard to any local planning policy. The local planning policy is a matter that must be given due weight, and if we choose not to, I am concerned that we may become overrun with new applications when the new regulations come into effect that will require short-term rental accommodation to be locationally specific. I understand that the DPLH is drafting a model local planning policy, and I'm pleased that they are looking at what this council has proposed in the form of the policy that is presently under consideration by this council. Locational characteristics is included in the present local planning policy. LPP 350-18 is our present local planning policy, and it contains the following clear statement. The city will generally not support proposals located more than 400 metres walking distance from a site, feature or area considered to be of tourism significance or located in an isolated location such as cul-de-sac streets or in rear-grouped dwellings. In this particular circumstance, there is no site, feature or area of tourism significance. There are additional things of which due regard is to be had under those regulations, and that includes any policies of the state and amenity of the locality, adequacy of access and egress from the site, and the impact of additional traffic on safety. Importantly, it also includes economic competition between new and existing businesses, and this is one of the new changes. And I note that there is a hotel immediately over the road paying commercial rates, having to comply with all of the legislation and ensure that they carry out the services of a hotel. There is no basis for the introduction of more short-stay accommodation in this locality. In fact, I note that there are approximately 400 unapproved short-stay accommodations within South Perth. We simply cannot look to accept all of the applications. In my view, it is not appropriate that we send a signal to our community, to our residents, that we will accept South Perth to become a dormitory suburb of Perth. I am sure that the Lord Mayor of Perth will love it as he looks to increase the spending in the city, but there is no evident benefit to our community as it introduces competition to our traditional accommodation providers, one of which is directly over the road. So in my view, we must draw a line in the sand. We must improve our policies and we must refuse this application. To do otherwise will send a clear message to our community that we will allow our communities to be impacted by short stay accommodation providers that provide competition to hotels and introduce amenity and traffic impacts. Our planning framework is worthless unless we are prepared to fight for the integrity of it, and I urge you all to reject this and allow the matter to proceed. So in summary, the City of South Perth must have a robust planning regime as well as a robust enforcement process. Presently, there is only one other short-term accommodation location that has been approved. Am I out of time?
The time's disappeared.
That's okay.
2 minutes left?
Sure.
All right.
Thank you. Short-term accommodation providers will be at risk of being further unlawful under the new provision being adopted to require registration. My task, however, is to consider the application of it on its merits. Whereas amenity has to a limited extent been addressed, the application and report does not address the intent of the residential zone and the depletion of the residential zone to be used for residential purposes, the state policy contained in the state's position statement, and amenity, which is not limited to noise and parties, but also includes cars, door slamming residents and residents who are unknown being introduced to the locality. The egress and access to and manoeuvring and parking of vehicles, impact on traffic safety, economic impact on the hotel on the other side of Canning Highway opposite the proposal, existing and continuing amenity impacts not addressed, and the intent of the council to locate this form of development in tourist locations. So just to wrap up, the city must be prepared to refuse as well as enforce the provisions of its scheme. Otherwise, what we must do in council is entirely meaningless. We owe it to our community. This application does not address what we have set within our planning framework. It does not provide what the surrounding residents can expect of a residential area, and it introduces a competition to the hotel immediately over the road. This is not a use that ought to be approved, rather it ought to be objected. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wall. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak in favour of the officer recommendation who hasn't already spoken? I'm going to take that was a no. I might say a few words. Statutory planning, I haven't got any notes, so I hope Council will bear with me. Statutory planning applications are one of those special decisions that Council gets called upon to make from time to time, and we don't have an advocacy role in statutory planning decisions in the same way that we do with most of the items that come before Council. We sit in what they call a quasi-judicial capacity, and we're required to apply planning law as though we were a member at the State Administrative Tribunal or a judge in a court. And it doesn't matter whether or not we don't like a particular planning outcome if the applicant is entitled to have their development application approved under our town planning scheme and under the relevant legislation and regulations. If we had an issue with that, we should have made sure that our town planning scheme read slightly differently. So in this case, we had an officer recommendation back in December of last year that this application be approved. Council made the decision not to approve it, and the applicant sought a review at the State Administrative Tribunal. The State Administrative Tribunal has now invited Council to reconsider its previous decision in December. That's what we're doing here now. It doesn't matter how I feel personally about this particular application. What matters is whether or not the applicant is entitled to have it approved under our scheme, and best as I can tell, the application complies. So for that reason, I do think we're obliged to pass the application. That's all I'll say. Does anyone else wish to speak either for or against the officer recommendation? Councillor Choi.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I actually valued what Councillor Wall had to say then, and I don't disagree. But I have to agree with Mayor Milner when it comes to where we as a council can can sit with this. And so, yeah, I will be supporting the officer recommendation, although I do agree with Councillor Ward's position as well. Thank you. And so hopefully we have a more robust LPS 7 moving forward and short-term accommodation policy, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak either for or against the officer recommendation? No. Councillor Coveney, is there, sorry, is Councillor Prendeville was the mover? Yes. Anything to say by way of winding up?
No, nothing further, thank you.
All right. In that case, councillors, I'm putting the officer recommendation to the vote. And the officer recommendation was passed 7 votes to 1. For the benefit of those listening via YouTube, those who voted in favour of the officer recommendation were myself, Mayor Milner, Councillor Brenda Abrandis, Councillor D'Souza, Councillor Cridland, Councillor Coveney, Councillor Choi and Councillor Prendeville. Those who voted against were Councillor Waugh. Okay, we now move on to the next item to be withdrawn for discussion this evening, which is item 10.4.3. It's entitled Strategic Community Plan, Minor Review. The reason this one has been pulled out for discussion this evening is an absolute majority is required. We do have an officer recommendation before us. I haven't received any amended motions or alternative motions. Does anyone wish to move the officer recommendation? I guess I will then. Does anyone wish to second it? Councillor Coveney, thank you. I don't have much to say, councillors. The Strategic Community Plan is one of the most important documents that we have at the City of South Perth. It guides the broad strategic outcomes and goals that we want to achieve for our community over the next 10 years. This year is a minor review. We do a minor review sort of in between the major reviews that come every 4 years. So the minor review has come at the 2-year mark. As far as I can tell, the Strategic Community Plan does seem to reflect the aspirations of our community, as it should. So I'm happy to move the officer recommendation. Councillor Coveney, anything to say, seconder?
Nothing further.
All right. Does anyone wish to speak against the officer recommendation? Does anyone else wish to speak in favour? No? Well, there being no debate, there's no need for me to wind up. I'll simply put it to the vote. Please cast your votes, councillors. And that was unanimous. Thank you. We now move to the next item to be withdrawn for discussion this evening, which is item 10.5.1, entitled Chief Executive Officer Key Performance Indicator Report. This is a new report, so that's the reason why it's been pulled out for discussion this evening. We do have an officer and a committee recommendation before us. By that I mean it's the same recommendation. There's not a separate officer recommendation and a separate committee recommendation. Once again, I haven't received any amended motions or alternative motions. Does anyone wish to move the officer and committee recommendation? I guess I will then. Anyone to second? I think Councillor Coveney was slightly ahead on the buzzer there. Once again, councillors, this report comes to us from the CEO Evaluation Committee. It was carried unanimously by the CEO Evaluation Committee. I see no reason not to approve the officer recommendation and the committee recommendation as is. Councillor Coveney, anything to say?
No.
All right. Does anyone wish to speak either for or against the officer and committee recommendation? No. There being no debate, I won't say anything by way of winding up. I'll simply put the officer and committee recommendation to the vote. Councillors, please cast your votes. And that was unanimous. Thank you. So that concludes item 10 of the agenda. We now move on to item 11, which is applications for a leave of absence. Councillors, does anyone have a leave of absence application that they'd like to submit? Councillor Cridland.
Might I please have a leave of absence for the period the 25th of April through to the 5th of May and the 18th of May to the 30th of May.
So just to confirm, that's the 25th of April to the 5th of May and the 18th of May through to the 30th of May?
Yes, please.
All right. Councillors, does anyone else have a leave of absence application? No, okay. In that case, I'm about to call for a mover and a seconder to move a motion that the leave of absence application received from Councillor Glenn Cridland for the periods of 25 April 2024 to 5 May 2024 and from 18 May 2024 to 30 May 2024 inclusive be granted. Councillor Coveney, thank you, and Councillor Choi seconding. Does anyone oppose, councillors? No. In that case, I'll declare it unanimously carried, and thank you all. Alrighty, we move on to item 12, which is motions of which previous notice has been given. The first of these is item 12.1, entitled Notice of Motion, Councillor Mary Choi, Angelo and Men Street Precincts, Letters to Main Roads, WA. Now, councillors, I've declared a proximity and financial interest in this item, so I'm about to be vacating my seat, and I'll be inviting the Deputy Mayor to take my place and carry out the duties as presiding member for the duration of item 12.1. And if someone could come and get me when item 12.1 has been dealt with, well, I'd be grateful. I'll see you all shortly.
Thank you. Okay, for the benefit of the transcript, Mayor Milner has left at 7:02 p.m. So item 12.1 relates to a notice of motion for Councillor Mary Choi. Councillor Choi, would you like to move your amended motion?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor Waugh. That council requests the CEO to write a letter to and or follow up with Main Roads Western Australia requesting the provision of a pedestrian crossing on Anstey Street in South Perth nearby Coles Local to complement and supplement the existing pedestrian crossing on Angelo Street, and B, pedestrian safety upgrades to the existing crossing on Men Street in South Perth with the aim of improving traffic safety and accessibility for the diverse range of users in both these increasingly busy South Perth precincts. And 2, feedback or report to be provided to Council as the City considers appropriate, together with any other safety recommendations or plans, either during the 24-25 annual budget process or at a future Council meeting, but by no later than June 2024. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. Do we have a seconder for the motion? Councillor Brendan-Brandis. Thank you. Councillor Choi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ms Presiding Member, and to Councillor Brendan-Brandis. So the reasons for this motion are, 1, both the Men's and Angelo Street precincts have evolved into heavy mixed-use areas with commercial, residential and recreational users coexisting and including an independent retirement village and nursing home, senior citizen centre and services, schools, daycare, sporting clubs and tourist attractions. As these precincts continue to grow and flourish, residents have reported witnessing numerous close calls and near misses between vehicles and pedestrians, including cyclists and scooter riders on these increasingly bustling streets within these areas. I have heard first-hand accounts, mainly from elderly residents who live in these precincts, for its proximity to local services and who may also rely on walking or assistive mobility aids to access nearby amenities, recounting instances of actually being knocked or nudged by vehicles, including a man in a wheelchair, and expressing a lack of feeling very safe or at ease crossing the roads. I believe other councillors may have also received some verbal and written testimonies from residents since this item was listed on the council agenda for tonight's meeting, including, sadly, an alleged report of someone being knocked unconscious and hospitalised around identified conflict points on Anstey Street in South Perth, which includes both adjacent and across from Coles Local, where traffic is known to get most congested, especially during peak times. The determination of any pedestrian crossing is, I understand, ultimately a decision of Main Roads WA as the decision maker, taking into account surrounding road and traffic conditions, and the City Administration, understanding the intent of the motion as we have discussed, will no doubt craft their request to Main Roads appropriately according to that intent concurrently with the relevant requirements. if of course this motion is endorsed by council. And nevertheless, I understand that the city has already commenced preliminary engagement with Main Roads, and hence the words amended in the motion request to include write a letter to and or follow up with. I've also been advised today that any type of crossing adjacent to Coles Local, e.g. on or around the footpath near the vehicle entry exit points, does not need Main Roads approval. And so I will liaise with the city on this further following this meeting. And hence the word adjacent has been removed from the motion and replaced with the suggested word nearby. The motion is therefore not prescriptive. It is sufficiently broad for its purpose, defining the intent and approximate area of Anstey Street and the crossing required, as Anstey Street runs across 2 wards from Angelo Street to South Terrace. 3, I understand that there may be a view that the status quo for the already existing pedestrian crossing on Main Street perhaps could or should await completion of the new surrounding developments, including but not limited to the Civic Heart apartments. However, for various reasons, estimated development completion dates can be delayed, and nevertheless, no sooner could one large development be completed, another one commences, which is actually the case right now, unsurprisingly, in this increasingly apartment-dense precinct. This motion is also not seeking the installation of a new pedestrian crossing at Main Street. It is ensuring the current pedestrian crossing, as already approved and installed by Main Roads WA, and which is strategically positioned to connect to the Main Street arcade and takes into account already surrounding established infrastructure, is maintained and enhanced at a level that optimises its safety, function and purpose, in readiness for the significant influx of new residents and visitors predicted to the Main Street precinct. This motion is also being raised now so that due consideration is afforded to it in the Council's 24-25 annual budget if endorsed, not a future budget or a year or two or more down the track. 4, given the increased densification of what were traditionally recognised as village precincts, and with further densification anticipated under the City's new Local Planning Scheme 7 into the future, it is crucial to provide additional support for the diverse range of user groups who frequent these precincts, and as emphasised, sooner rather than later. This includes enhanced road sharing practices and bolstering safety measures for people of all ages, abilities and modes of transportation, accessing local facilities and the surrounding areas. And 5, feedback to Council should preferably and prudently include any additional safety recommendations or plans that the City might contemplate as necessary or desirable to further enhance and improve safety and amenity in these significant South Perth precincts. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. Councillor Brendan-Brandis, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you very much. This is quite an important motion. The ultimate decision maker with regard to this is Main Roads WA. We have seen an increase in density in the Mill Point ward, in particular around the Main Street area and also the Angelo Street area. The concerns have been raised on countless occasions by the residents with regard to the increased density, the impact on vehicles on the roads and mixed use vehicles as well. So light vehicles, heavy vehicles, and also commercial vehicles in the area. There is a significant need to actually ensure that we actually address some of these safety concerns in an already densely populated location. And this is going to only continue to increase with density as the infill happens and some of the larger complexes commence operating. Civic Heart will actually have a significant increase on the traffic use and density around that area, which is already quite congested. So I think this is a very timely motion that Councillor Choi is putting forward, that we should be requesting a follow-up from Main Roads WA to undertake some of the requirements to actually address some of these safety issues on our densely populated roads. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brendan-Brandis. Does anybody wish to speak against the motion? Councillor Coveney.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I've got no issue with 1A. I cross Anstey Street almost every day and walk to that Coles, and frankly, having a crosswalk around there I think is a sensible idea, so I commend Councillor Choi for bringing that aspect of her motion forward. In relation to 1B, it may be that that's a sensible idea, but my principal concern is this. is that if we are going to do a review of the entire Peninsula precinct, because there are traffic and safety congestion issues everywhere, then it might be determined in that study, in that assessment, that maybe there shouldn't be a crosswalk there, maybe there should be a crosswalk somewhere else, maybe traffic flow should change. So when we're dealing with the finite resources that is the administration and the funds of the community, my concern is doing one thing and then we find out in 6 months' time we should be doing something else. So that's why I put forward my amended motion that I won't speak to now, but I believe is covered in that, i.e. that 1A is sensible, but 1B for the time being is not.
So Councillor Coveney, if you wish to move an amendment, now is the opportunity for you to move that.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So my amended notice of motion, which I believe is in front of everybody, reads, did you want me to read it out, the amended motion, or just?
Yeah, just the bit that you need to amend, thanks.
Sure. So the amendment is really crossing out 1B, and then in the paragraph that precedes it, removing reference to in both these increasingly busy South Perth precincts. And that's to capture the fact that this motion covers simply Ainsty Street and not Ainsty Street and Men's Street. And I've also removed from paragraph 2 the words or report. And again, that's focused on a costing issue for the administration and time. I see no reason why informal feedback can't be provided. I don't see why we need a report on an isolated issue that to me seems rather minor.
Thank you, Councillor Coveney. Is there a seconder for the amendment? Councillor Prenderville, would you like to speak to the amendment?
Thank you, Deputy War. I tend to agree with Councillor Coveney. I am in favour of efficiency and assessments of issues and potential upgrades, amendments, improvements to what we have. Topics like safety and traffic and these sorts of things, while they're extremely important, I think they're best viewed holistically, and instead of reacting to individual circumstances and issues like Men's Street, for example, I think they need to be evaluated strategically and collectively. Ainsty Street, I support Councillor Coveney's amended motion. I think 1A is really important. I actually think 1B, Men's Street, is covered in 12.3 in terms of the peninsula. So I think that everything is captured this evening in the motions, but I do get concerned about being too specific on areas, and particularly that whole peninsula space. There's a lot going on down there, and we really need to sort of rise above all of the issues and look at the whole thing collectively and holistically. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Prenderville. Does anybody wish to speak against the amendment? Councillor Brenda Radis.
Sorry, I have a question.
Yes.
Yep. Just with regard to these precincts, is the administration considering any further review or studies to be undertaken with regard to safety, congestion? Thank you.
Who shall I put that to?
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Mayor. As far as the Angelo Street precinct goes, there was previously consideration given to a raised platform at the Angelo Anstey intersection. That didn't proceed because there was insufficient budget at the time to do it. There isn't a wider review considered for that area. However, as I think in the officer recommendation for Mill Point, the commentary there acknowledges that there are multiple issues within the Mill Point Peninsula area, and that it probably warrants a further review of that area.
Thank you, Ms Amprimo. Is there anybody who wishes to speak against the amendment? Councillor Brenda Radis.
Thank you, Presiding Member. Yes, I'm going to be voting against the amendment. on the basis that I think where we have got an existing crossing on Men Street, which is also causing concerns with regard to the safety, I think that does need to be addressed. So I'm reluctant to remove it when it should be given fair consideration. This is a request of Main Roads to actually consider that. So I don't want to remove something that is requiring our attention right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brenner-Brandis. Does anybody wish to speak in favour of the amendment? Does anybody else wish to speak against the amendment? Councillor Choi?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor Waugh. Look, there's a number of things I can probably say there. First of all, this motion is presented on behalf of residents concerned about theirs and others' safety in these busiest areas of South Perth. These have been looked at, discussed administratively, behind the scenes for a long time before bringing this motion. And it's not for a minor reason. It is for, as Councillor Prendiville has said, an extremely important safety reason. In terms of the Men Street crossing, that's already there. But in terms of enhancing the safety there for residents and visitors, it's about looking at what else can be done. It's not about creating a whole new crosswalk. It's already there. It's there for a reason. It connects to, as I said, the arcade there. And it is in terms of just like repainting, I don't know, making it stand out more from all the distractions that are now there on Main Street in terms of signage and benches and other infrastructure. So I just can't see what the issue is with that in terms of making that safer than what it already is. It's not creating a whole new piece of infrastructure. It's just enhancing what the city's already got there with Main Roads consent. So, and the other thing to say is in terms of the feedback, at point 2, I'd said the feedback or report to be provided to council as the city considers appropriate. So it's up to the city if they want to prepare the feedback or provide a report as what they consider to be appropriate, together with any other safety recommendations or plans. So, and again, it's either during the budget process or at a future council meeting. So again, it's giving the city the discretion and what is they feel is appropriate, depending on maybe what feedback they want to provide us, and the mode of that. So yeah, I'm a little bit confused about the comments around that. But yeah, that's all I have to say. And urge councillors to support the motion as brought originally. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. Does anybody else wish to speak to the motion? No? Okay, let's put the amended motion to the vote. Okay. Ooh. Seven, we're one down. Oh, that's because Mayor Milner has left the room. Okay, so the amendment is carried, 5 votes to 2. Yes. Thank you. For the benefit of the transcript or the record, the 5 in favour of the amendment were Councillor De Souza, Councillor Cridland, Councillor Coveney, Councillor Prendiville and myself, Councillor Waugh, and those against were Councillor Brenner-Brandis and Councillor Choi. Thank you. Oh, my apologies. So now we go back to the amended motion, the motion as amended. Councillor Coveney, need to speak to that one as well. We've already passed it. Sorry. Yes. Yes. Oh, okay. All right. So, so now we're back to notice of motion 12.1 with the amendments. Can I have a mover for that one? Oh, it's already moved and seconded. Does anybody wish to speak to that? No? Councillor Choi, you have the opportunity to close.
Yes, thank you to presiding member. Look, I'm a little bit disappointed that the Main Street are going to miss out on their enhanced pedestrian crossing because who knows when this can be brought back again. I don't think it'll be brought back for another 3 months or so. I don't know what the standing orders, I can't remember what to say about that. But it could be, you know, a year, 2 years, whatever down the track, who knows, when anything comes back to council again. As I said, this has been discussed for a long time behind the scenes before bringing this motion. So disappointed with that, but if that's obviously how council has decided or will decide, that's fine. You know, I will support this motion because it still obviously delivers safety improvements to Angelo Street precinct and Anstey Street. So yes, obviously I won't be voting against it. I'll be supporting it as amended. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. Okay, councillors, I now put the amended motion to the vote. Thank you, and that's carried unanimously. Thank you. And can somebody please collect Mayor Milner? Thank you.
Alrighty, I'm back. Thank you all. Thank you, Councillor Ward, for acting as presiding member in my absence. I'm assuming we've just dealt with item 12.1. We're on to item 12.2 now. Is that correct, Ms. Fryer? Yes, brilliant. Okay. So next item is item 12.2. It's a notice of motion from Councillor Mary Choi. It's entitled Incentivisation for Long-Term Unoccupied Dwellings and Vacant Land. I have the notice of motion here. I haven't received any amended or alternative motions. Councillor Choi, would you like to move your notice of motion?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. One, that council requests the CEO to prepare a report for council detailing potential strategies for incentivising owners of vacant land and unoccupied residential housing to develop their land or make their unoccupied housing available for long-term rentals, with the aim of increasing the number of houses available for rent in the City of South Perth and improving the amenity of suburbs within the district. And two, that the report be presented no later than the June 2024 Ordinary Council meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just see if anyone wishes to second that notice of motion. Does anyone wish to second? Councillor Brenda Abrandis, thank you. Councillor Choi, the floor is yours for your reasons.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and to Councillor Brenda Abrandis. So the reasons are, one, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics data from the last recorded census of population and housing conducted on 10 August 2021 and subsequent media articles published throughout 22-23, South Perth as an apartment dense area was identified as having one of the highest rates of unoccupancies, with around 1 in every 5 to 6 homes vacant, despite the state's reported rental crisis. It may be that a significant number of these homes were and remain investment properties, or second homes or holiday homes, but also perhaps some were vacant due to residents being regional or fly-in, fly-out workers, and other residents for whatever reason did not complete the census. Nonetheless, as urban infilling and apartments reportedly attract higher levels of vacancy, the number of unoccupied residential dwellings within the district appears only set to rise. Two, one of the important objectives of the City Strategic Community Plan 2021 to 2031 is to facilitate and foster safe and connected communities. Long-term vacant blocks for land banking purposes and empty homes, sometimes referred to now as ghost houses, are generally not great for a vibrant and thriving community. Walking down a street on any given day past vacant blocks overgrown with weeds or rubbish continually dumped or past houses on an evening when you know no lights are going to be on, sometimes at multiple properties on the same street because no one lives there, may not provide that sense of a connected, safe or secure community for other residents who may live nearby And this also reportedly applies to residents living in apartment complexes where multiple units may sit empty for long periods of time. And 3, some local governments across Australia have already responded to their local housing supply crisis and increasing home unoccupancy rates whilst awaiting direction from respective state governments by introducing various short-term measures, from writing to residents encouraging them to rent out their unoccupied homes, some with reportedly outstanding results, to increasing rates for unoccupied homes and vacant land without a good reason for over 6 months. As there could be many reasons why property may remain unoccupied or undeveloped long term, and up-to-date data collection and enforceability could prove difficult and costly for the city to undertake, it is a view that incentivisation is the best approach for this local government. Since Council is already considering a short-term accommodation local planning policy, it is a view this is the right time to also consider ways of reducing land banking and long-term unoccupancy rates throughout the district, with the aim of not just addressing housing supply, but also to maintain the amenity local residents expect and further promote connected communities with local visual amenity, vibrancy and security of our streets. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. Councillor Brenda Brandis, you're the seconder. Would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, this is a very important motion before us tonight. We're all quite aware of the housing crisis that we're currently experiencing and the difficulties of first homeowners and also those in the rental market to actually attain reasonable accommodation and also in reasonable locations. The housing crisis is not isolated to Perth. It is a national issue. This motion before us does request the CEO to actually consider certain strategies with regard to incentivising, increasing the utilisation of dwellings, and also consider the regard to undeveloped properties as well, which could actually provide future accommodation. So we do need to actually consider this as a local government. Whilst there might be a greater impact coming from the state government, we do need to actually commence this process where we actually start looking at our own statistics and our own high vacancy rates. As Councillor Choi has alluded to, the fact that if you have a higher occupancy rate, you actually have a greater sense of community, and with that comes benefits, including passive surveillance and security and well-being for members of the community. So this is a very important motion. We do need to actually consider how we respond to a larger crisis, how we respond to trying to maximise utilisation and also consequentially driving down the rental costs and increasing the occupancy rates. So for these reasons, I think it's actually a very good motion, and we do need to actually explore it and ask the CEO to consider incentives. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Brandis. Councillors, Councillor Choi, I see you've got your light on there. Okay. Does anyone wish to speak against the notice of motion? Does anyone else wish to speak in favour of the notice of motion? Councillor Coveney?
I have a question.
Fire away.
The comment by the officer is that some work has previously been undertaken on, in effect, this motion, and that there wouldn't be significant impact on the budget. So my query is, if this motion isn't passed, has this work already, in effect, already been done and will just be presented to council?
Mr Lecoq, should I send that your way?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This work goes back several years and included even some legal advice. So it is information that we intend bringing forward to one of the budget workshops to discuss with council and see if any of that brings any other or new issues to the fore.
Thank you.
I guess I'll ask a question of my own, and I'm not sure whether it's to Ms Fry or to Mr Lecoq. I have no issue with this particular motion. It's of a similar flavour to the sort of discussions that council's had in previous budget workshops in previous years. I guess the only thing I'd ask is it might be that the June 2024 ordinary council meeting might be a tiny bit late for this information to be of relevance to decisions that we make leading up to the budget, which I assume is going to be at the June 2024 ordinary council meeting. Is it possible that information of the kind that this notice of motion is calling for could be presented to council in the budget workshops themselves? Is that probably best sent to you, Mr. Lecoq?
Yes, that is indeed the intent, is to present some of this information at the next budget workshop.
All right, thank you. Councillors, does anyone else wish to speak? Either Councillor Cridland.
I commend Councillor Choi on this particular motion. It's got two aspects to it, as I see. One is in respect of any way of incentivising people who've left their properties vacant to fill them, so that people who can't find a house or a unit can have somewhere to live. And we've all seen enough people sleeping in cars in our parks to know that it's a pretty big problem in WA. So if we could do anything, that'd be great. The aspect that I know has come before council before, I think mainly informally, because I can remember it being dealt with or raised and dealt with on a number of occasions previously in budgets, is looking at two things. One is, do we wish to have differential rates in respect of owner-occupiers and people who are using their property as a business, that is renting it out? That's one thing that we've done previously. And we've also looked at a differential rate for vacant land, which would have an incentivisation to people to not leave it overgrown and vacant, but rather to build something on it, and hopefully a home that you know, another South Perth family could live in. So there would be a lot of work on file. Perhaps it does need to be updated. Maybe it could be shared around informally in advance, so it could be useful at budget workshops. I have no difficulty with this coming back by way of a report, but I think it would be great if councillors, in particular the new ones who haven't seen this several times like I have, can have the opportunity of thinking of those issues. Do we want to have one level of rates for everyone, or do we want to start thinking of differential rates as a way of incentivising outcomes? And I think this motion again raises this hoary issue that we have looked at but kind of kicked down the road on a number of occasions before.
Thank you, Councillor Cridland. Councillor Prendeville.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question, if I can. Apologies if this has been answered. Again, I find this topic really interesting, and it's definitely prevalent in the city of South Perth. If administration are working on this topic and bringing this information to us in budget workshops soon, if we pass this motion this evening, does that remain and we also receive a report in the June OCM, or does anything that was going to be presented in the budget workshop change? Do we still get all of that information plus we get a report to June, please?
Ms. Lecoq, can I send that your way?
So the information prepared for the budget workshop would remain the same. However, if the council resolution gets passed, then we have to execute the council resolution as well.
Councillor Choi, a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I'm happy to amend my point 2 of my motion, because this is all new information to me. So even though I submitted this about 3 weeks ago, I did ask for a review of the motion. This information about what I've requested for the June OCM coming perhaps during the budget workshop is new information. So in taking this into account now on the floor, I am happy to move paragraph or point 2 of my motion that the report be presented during the 2024-25 annual budget process, but by no later than June 20 OCM, if that's helpful.
All right, so just so I make sure I've got this correct, if I heard you correctly, paragraph 2 would now read, the report to be presented during the 2024-2025 annual budget workshops. You happy with that
Or process.
process? But so, Councillor Choi, just so you've got the benefit of that, I'm being given advice that if you include that by no later than the June 2024 ordinary council meeting, a formal report will have to go to council. Is it your intention that this information simply be presented during the budget workshop process?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Look, I don't mind. I think I've written them like that before, you know, but I know later than at an OCM, but that's okay. If that's what the advice is, I'm happy just to leave that bit off then and just replace June, no later than the June 2024 ordinary council meeting with during the 24-25 annual budget process.
Okay. Councillor Brenda Brandis, you're the seconder. Are you happy with that? All right. Well, with that in mind, does anyone else wish to speak either for or against? Councillor Coveney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wish to speak in favour of the motion. I think it's very timely. I think people don't like living next to ghost houses or sandpits, and to incentivise those things to be turned into our neighbours when we're in a housing crisis, when the rental rate is, I think, less than 0.75%, as I say, is timely and necessary, and we should be doing our bit. So I commend Councillor Choi for this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Coveney. Councillors, anyone else that wishes to speak either for or against? I'll simply say that I think the amended motion is sensible and timely, and I'm very happy to support it. Anyone else wish to speak either for or against? Nope. Councillor Choi, if there's, I don't think anyone's against the revised motion. Anything to say by way of winding up?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just as the city has said, they are already doing some work and maybe bringing back some historical information that I have not seen before. I certainly don't recall it, so it'll be interesting, especially some of their legal advice. I don't recall, so I don't know how historical it is. If maybe even before my time. Yeah, so I look forward to receiving that and having further discussion with councillors during the annual budget process. Thanks.
All right, then, councillors, I'm putting the notice of motion recommendation, subject to that small change at paragraph 2, that the report be presented during the 2024 to 2025 annual budget process. I'm putting that slightly amended notice of motion to the vote. Please cast your votes. And I'm waiting on one more vote. And that was unanimous. Thank you, councillors. So that brings us to item 12.3, which is a notice of motion from Councillor Mary Choi. It's entitled Mill Point Road Traffic Safety Review. I am aware that Councillor Coveney has foreshadowed an alternative motion in the event that this notice of motion is not successful. But for the time being, Councillor Choi, would you like to read your notice of motion?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. That the council requests the CEO to 1, scope a traffic study of the Mill Point Peninsula informed by community feedback received, and concurrently, 2, undertake a high-level review of the following city plans as follows. 1, the South Perth Activity Centre Plan, otherwise known as SPACP. 2, the Integrated Transport Plan. And 3, the Parking Management Action Plan for the SPACP with respect to traffic safety and traffic congestion issues within the SPACP area. And 3, provide feedback to council on the scope and costings as part of the 24-25 annual budget process. And 4, report to council on the conclusion of the above activities outlined in paragraphs 1 to 2 above, with recommendations to address traffic safety and traffic congestion issues within the South Perth Activity Centre area at an appropriate time during the 24-25 financial year. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councillor Choi. Would anyone like to second that? And just for clarity, Councillor Choi, I see there's an amended version that's on our desks here. I presume that's the one that you're moving?
That's correct. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Would anyone like to second Councillor Choi's amended notice of motion? Councillor Brenda Brandis, Councillor Choi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and to Councillor Brenda Brandis. The reasons for this motion are as follows. 1, Residents are repeatedly raising concerns about traffic safety, particularly with vehicles exiting driveways along Mill Point Road, the peninsula end. The presence of large street trees and parked cars on both sides of the road, unfortunately with some inconsiderate motorists also constantly parking over the yellow line markings near property driveways, are consistently obstructing driver visibility and line of sight. This in turn is creating daily apprehension for residents attempting to drive their vehicles safely without incident out onto busy Mill Point Road, with reportedly many near misses occurring with other road users, including cyclists. 2. City officers have responded accordingly on request to these residents' concerns on a seemingly individual complaint basis, occasionally adjusting parking spaces or altering road markings. However, despite these efforts, residents from the same and other properties continue to raise the issue, offering a variety of suggestions along the way, indicating the need for a more comprehensive solution to be found to improve safety and enhance accessibility along Mill Point Road, and to protect the future amenity of the area for residents and other road users. 3. Given the increased densification of what was traditionally considered a village precinct, with further densification anticipated under the city's new local planning scheme 7 from now and into the future, it is also an opportune time for a review of the city's suite of plans as it pertains to the SPACP area to be undertaken, with foreseen recommendations flowing from that review for Council's further consideration in due course. 4. I understand that there may be a view that the status quo for residents living along Mill Point Road, Peninsula End, could or should remain until completion of this plan review requested. And while news surrounding developments, including but not limited to the Civic Heart apartments, are completed. However, for various reasons, estimated development and completion dates can be delayed, and nevertheless, no sooner could one large development be completed, another one commences in this increasingly apartment-dense precinct. And it is also anticipated that the plan review may take some time. Hence, it is the view there is no reason why the traffic study, in accordance with the suggested officer recommendation, and plan review cannot be undertaken concurrently, or to provide immediate relief to the residents who need it now, and in readiness for the significant influx of new residents and visitors predicted to arrive into the SPACP area in the future. This motion is also being raised now so that due consideration is afforded to it in the Council's 24-25 annual budget process if endorsed. I think that's it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. Councillor Brenda Brandis, you're the seconder. If you'd like to speak, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, this is an important motion. We've spoken tonight, and many times over the last few years we've had deputations with regard to traffic congestion, traffic safety within the South Perth Activity Centre Plan area. This motion is important because we should undertake a high-level review of the impact that our density infill and congestion and vehicles are actually having within that locality. So for this reason, I don't need to articulate any further, but Councillor Choi has actually provided sufficient information with regard to the Mill Point Road area in particular, and also the congestion, which we've heard a couple of times tonight. I do support this motion. I'm also very supportive that we've taken into consideration that any of the work required should be part of the 24-25 budget process. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Brandis. At this point, I might ask a question because I don't think I've seen this latest version of Councillor Choi's notice of motion until this meeting. Apologies if it was sent through any earlier. At first glance, and I haven't had an opportunity to read it, it does look fairly similar to Councillor Coveney's foreshadowed notice of motion. I guess I'll ask a question of Ms Amprimo. What's the difference between these two motions now, if any?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the way the current notice of motion that we're discussing is worded, if council are to resolve that notice of motion, they would effectively be requesting the CEO to undertake work that they haven't made budget provision to do, which would mean that item 2 and 4 couldn't be implemented without a budget item. I think potentially what Councillor Choi is trying to achieve is similar to what Councillor Coveney's notice of motion or alternate notice of motion wording is seeking to do, because that one is subject to the funds being approved in the 24-25 budget. So I think Councillor Choi is potentially trying to do the same, achieve the same outcome, but the way it's worded, if Council resolve the wording that's there at the moment, they are asking the administration to do something that Council have made no budget provision to allow the administration to do.
All right, thank you, Ms Ambrimo. I think Councillor Coveney might have been first. A question or speaking for or against?
Speaking against the motion.
All right, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've got three principal difficulties with with Councillor Choi's motion. The first is, as just highlighted by Ms Ambrimo, in respect of not having budget funds allocated. The second being, for the same reason that I brought my amended motion 2.1, which was passed, in that Councillor Choi's motion still seeks to do one thing now and do something else later, i.e. I understand Councillor Choi still seeks to address one road now, but then deal with the whole thing later, which in my view is an inefficient use of council resources, but admin resources. So hence why, and I won't speak in depth, but I prefer my motion because it deals with things holistically. So you avoid putting one issue from one street onto another street. And thirdly, I read this for the first time when it hit the desk at 6 o'clock. So again, I don't like making decisions when I receive them at 6 o'clock, the time of a meeting. It's just not, in my view, an appropriate way to make significant decisions.
Thank you, Councillor Coveney. Councillor Choi, I saw your hand up there asking a question.
Yes, just clarification, because I did send this through to the city officers and asked for some feedback, and I did receive some feedback, and it didn't say anything about budget allocation issues, as I considered as well at point 3 that says provide feedback to council on the scope and costings as part of the 24-25 annual budget process. So I would anticipate that what that means is that during that budget process we would get the scope and the costings for those activities.
Councillor Choi, you have moved the motion. You can't speak twice. You can ask a question, but...
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. That's what I'm asking. I don't really understand the issue because that's what the intent of point 3 is.
So you're asking Ms Ambrimo to elaborate on okay, Ms Ambrimo?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So, like I said earlier, I think I understand the intent of your motion, but, and I appreciate that you sent it through this afternoon, but there's a lot of correspondence going back and forward, and there's very limited time to review it before the meeting. The way it is actually written, that is interpreted that we would have to implement, if council resolve this notice of motion, we would have to implement all of that, and we haven't got a budget provision to undertake the review of those documents, because we have annually, we have in our operational budget money for minor safety, traffic-related traffic safety ones, which is we do ad hoc that come up. But this is a substantial piece of work to review those 3 documents, and we would have a separate budget line item to cover that work. So if council resolve it, then we have no budget to cover that. And the way of including that work would be when we come back through the budget workshops, there would be a line item in there and council would approve it as part of the budget. But this resolution, the way it's worded, is seeking for council to instruct the administration to do that work now prior to any budget approval.
Thank you, Ms Ambrimo. Councillor Sousa?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. A question. I guess what's coming out here is the critical issue is the question of budget. I guess my question is, would this work be predominantly done internally or by internal resources, or would it involve external consultants? Because I think those would be two quite different budget implications.
Ms Ambrimo?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There would be a significant amount of external consultants work required, because potentially, I mean, we haven't scoped this. The intent of taking it to the budget workshop, and bearing in mind that's not that far away, but we should be able to have an indication of what the cost would be by the time we have the next budget workshop. But we could need to undertake revised traffic modelling, and that would require specialist external consultants. There's other aspects that we're likely to, we don't have the capacity in-house to do the work that would be involved in reviewing these three documents, because it's quite a complex area with not particularly obvious solutions to the problems.
Thank you, Ms Ampremo. Councillor De Souza.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, for the question, because I do struggle to see the difference between these two motions. Isn't the issue of budget already covered by clause 3 of Councillor Choi's motion, feedback on scope and costings?
Ms Ampremo.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. No, the way that it is worded is, if council resolved this, council would be instructing the CEO to, and if you look at item 2, undertake a high-level review of the following city plans, right? That is a standalone item that the council would be instructing the administration to do. It almost makes point 3 redundant, because there would be no point in providing council feedback through the budget process on doing that activity when you've already instructed the administration to do that activity anyway. So we would then need a subsequent, if council decided they couldn't allocate the budget, we would then need a subsequent council resolution that overturns the resolution that you've made to instruct us to do that work. So if you don't provide us with the budget, we could be sitting there in a position where council has instructed the administration to do a piece of work and has then failed to resolve to provide the budget to do that work. And the administration has an obligation to carry out any lawful instruction that council resolves. So it would require a resolution to effectively overturn the previous resolution if there was no budget for it. So, and I'm assuming that you've all got Councillor Coveney's motion in front of you. That one says subject to council allocating the funds in the budget. So it's dependent on council approving the budget with those funds in it, which would mean that you don't have to come back and do a further resolution. You would be instructing the administration to do that work through the budget process, because there'll be a line item in the budget for it. Does that answer? Yeah.
Thank you, Ms Ampremo. I saw Councillor Brenda Abrandis put his hand up, and I also saw Councillor Choi put her hand up. So, Councillor Brenda Abrandis, did you wish to speak for or against, or are you asking a question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just asking a question. It was similar to Councillor De Souza. So, with regard to point 2, undertake a high-level review. If we're talking about a high-level review with regard to Roman numeral 1, 2 and 3, would that not just be performed by the city as a high-level review, as opposed to engaging external consultants who I'd probably be expecting to be doing a detailed review?
Ms Ampremo.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you for the question. Whilst there's a bit subjective, the words high-level review, my interpretation of high-level review, when I read that in conjunction with point 4, it says report to council on the conclusions of the above activities with recommendations to address the traffic safety and traffic congestion issues. If the review is that high level, that it's only a sort of internal officer review, we would not be in a position to make recommendations on improvements to address the traffic safety and traffic congestion issues. If the solution were that straightforward, we would have already been able to do that, and we would have already provided council with the feedback. Unfortunately, the way the peninsula is, the land use planning in the area, the road network is very challenging to provide an optimal outcome for the development there. So a simple review, it uses the term high level, but I would say a simple review of those documents is not going to put us in a position where we can provide council with any recommendations on what to do. So, if number 2 is done at, if I interpret high level as very simplistic, then I'm not going to be able to provide anything meaningful in item 4.
Thank you, Ms Amprimo. Councillor Choi, a question?
Yes, thanks, Mr Mayor. Like with the other motion that I amended, I'm happy to amend this motion because now that I've received that clarification this evening on the wording, I thought it was sufficient, paragraph 3 as it stood, but now learnt that it's not. So I'm happy to amend paragraph 1 to take into account the advice received.
So sorry, Councillor Choi, you're going to have to tell me what that amended motion looks like.
Sure. So the council requests the CEO to 1, subject to paragraph 3 below, and the council allocating the funds necessary in the 24-25 annual budget, scope a traffic study of the Mill Point Peninsula informed by community feedback received, and concurrently, and then etc.
Governance, are we able to get this amendment onto the screen? I'm concerned that we've got what is a pretty important and far-reaching motion in front of us, but I'm a bit uncomfortable with not being able to see what it is that's actually being proposed. Councillor Choi?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, it's just really combining, like we did with the Hooning motion that came in February, so elements of both mine and Councillor Coveney's motion. So if we're able to do that, then we're able to get a good result, I believe, for the community, as we did with that motion in February.
Councillor Choi, I do have to point out that I'm uncomfortable with doing this sort of stuff on the fly. It's within your right to insist upon amending this motion if Councillor Brenda Abrandis as seconder is willing to go along with it. But I think you have to walk us through the motion from start to finish as to how it's going to look if you're asking councillors to vote on what is a pretty consequential notice of motion.
Yep, no problem. Yep, do you want to start now?
Yes,
Are you
please.
ready? Okay, yeah, so that council requests the CEO to 1, subject to paragraph 3 below, and the council allocating the funds necessary in the 24-25 annual budget. And then the rest of it as is, scope of traffic study of the Mill Point Peninsula, informed by community feedback received and concurrently. And then 2 the same.
Go on.
And paragraph 3 the same, and 4 the same. So it's just that, I think if I understand Acting CEO Premo correctly, that is what is required to make that work. Is that correct?
Ms Amprimo?
Yes, so you'd need to request the CEO to, subject to the funding being made available, allocated through the 24-25 budget, and then undertake those. But then I don't know if that would make sense, because you're looking at putting those words before 1, 2 and 3. Is that what you're... So you're putting those words before your dot points 1, 2, 3,
No,
and 4?
just at point 1, Director Premo, would that not be sufficient to do it at 1, because it's all related? It all flows together. It's all connected.
If you put it at 1, then that applies to 1.
Okay,
So-
well then I'm happy to apply it to 2 as well.
Yeah, because item 2 needs to have budget provision as well.
Yep. Okay.
Presiding officer, is Councillor Coveney hasn't put his
No,
wording.
he's foreshadowed his alternative motion, which I understand will be moved in the event that Councillor Choi's notice of motion fails. But we're still on Councillor Choi's notice of motion at this point in time.
Is there an opportunity for Councillor Choi to propose a modification to align with Councillor Coveney's, if that was something that Councillor Choi wished to do?
What I might do is move a motion that we have a short 10-minute recess so that Councillor Choi can put something in writing and potentially convene with Councillor Coveney. I'm pretty uncomfortable with doing amendments like this on the fly. So if someone's willing to second my motion that we have a 10-minute recess, Councillor Choi, thank you. Councillors, I'm moving a motion that we recess for 10 minutes. Please cast your votes. That was unanimous. I'll see you all back here at 10 minutes past 8. Alrighty, folks, it's 8:08, but looks like everyone's here and ready to go, so we'll reconvene. Councillor Choi, can you let us know what it is that you're moving in terms of your motion now?
No, I'll just keep it as is, and we'll just see where that goes. I think it's a little bit too complicated now to amend it, as we've discovered during the break,
Alright, so
without
just
doing
to
substantial
clarify-
amendments. So I think it's already been moved and seconded. So
Yes,
I
so
think it has
Councillor
to
Brenda
proceed.
Abrandis
My understanding is.
seconded the motion that appears on the pieces of paper that we got at 6 o'clock. So just that, no amendments? All right, okay. So Councillor Choi has moved the notice of motion as it appears in the hard copy that's been provided to councillors this evening. Councillor Brenda Abrandis has seconded that. Councillor Coveney has spoken against the notice of motion before us at the moment. Is there anyone else who hasn't already spoken who would like to speak for the notice of motion before us? No. Is there anyone else who would like to speak against? No. Councillor Coveney, I take it your intention is you've foreshadowed your alternative motion and you intend to move that if the current notice of motion fails?
Yes.
All right. Well, if there's no one else to speak either for or against, Councillor Choi, you have 5 minutes to wind up if you would like to do so.
No, that's fine. I think we've taken up enough time during the break, so I'll forego that in lieu of that. Thank you.
All right. So, councillors, I'm putting the notice of motion that appears in your hard copies for item 12.3 to the vote, and bear in mind that Councillor Coveney has foreshadowed his own alternative motion should this notice of motion fail. With that, please cast your votes. All right. So the current notice of motion from Councillor Choi has failed 3 votes to 5. For those who are listening via YouTube, those who voted in favour were Councillor Choi, Councillor Waugh and Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Those voting against were myself, Mayor Milner, Councillor D'Souza, Councillor Cridland, Councillor Coveney and Councillor Prendeville. Councillor Coveney, you foreshadowed your own alternative motion. Would you like to read the alternative motion and then I'll see if there's someone willing to second your alternative motion?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My foreshadowed notice of motion reads as follows. Council requests the CEO to 1, subject to Council allocating appropriate funds in the 24-25 budget, conduct a high-level review of A, the South Perth Activity Centre Plan, B, the Integrated Transport Plan, and C, the Parking Management Action Plan for the South Perth Station Precinct with respect to traffic safety and traffic congestion issues within the South Perth Activity Centre area following the completion of Civic Heart. 2, advise Council of the necessary budget funding required to conduct the above-mentioned review during the 24-25 budget discussions so that Council can allocate the necessary funding in the 24-25 budget. And 3, subject to paragraphs 1 and 2 above, report back to Council with recommendations to address traffic safety and traffic congestion issues within the South Perth Activity Centre area at an appropriate time during the 24-25 financial year.
Thank you, Councillor Coveney. Is there anyone who would like to, Councillor Choi, putting your hand up to second?
Yes, thanks, Mr Mayor.
All right. Councillor Coveney, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll be brief. Dealing with traffic safety and congestion issues collectively will mitigate the risk of shifting an issue elsewhere, and it ensures the efficient use of our city resources by dealing with similar issues at once. There is significant traffic congestion every morning and afternoon during peak hour along Mill Point Road, Lavishire Road and at the Men Street lights. There's significant safety issues on particular streets caused by the existing configuration of parking, particularly on Mill Point Road between Mill Point Close and Lavishire Road, on Harper Terrace and on Men Street. These sorts of congestion and safety related issues will only increase with what appears to be the inevitable medium to high density development along the river between Canning Bridge and the South Perth Peninsula. Equally, parking remains at a premium. The Parking Management Action Plan for the South Perth Station Precinct prepared in 2017, the South Perth Activity Centre Plan approved in 21, and the Integrated Transport Plan approved in September 21 are useful starting points for this review, but being mindful of the changing landscape of this area over the last few years and into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Coveney. Councillor Choi, you're the seconder. Would you like to speak?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, my reasons I already gave with my motion. So the only thing that I want to raise is an amendment to, which is why I agreed to drop mine and then support Councillor Coveney's motion, is the parts that I had in mind that weren't in his, apparently after speaking to Director Impremo during that recess, can be done within paragraph 1. It just, we need to add at the end of Civic Heart, that last line, comma, taking community feedback received into account, full stop.
Are you happy to be absorbed into your notice of motion, Councillor Coveney?
I've got no difficulty.
All right. Okay, I'll thank you both. I guess I'll ask a simple question of Ms Ampremo. I don't see any reason why the proposed amendment about taking community feedback into account should be problematic. Is there any reason why the amendment should cause us any trouble?
No, there's no reason why that should be an issue, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak against the slightly amended notice of motion? No? Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in favour? No? I'll say a few words, but I'll keep it very brief. Traffic congestion, which of course has an impact on traffic safety, is one of the big issues that our community has raised with us in the past. So very happy to support this notice of motion. Did anyone else want to say anything before I put it to the vote? No, Councillor Coveney, there wasn't any debate, so no need to wind up. I'll simply put the notice of motion to the vote. And governance, can we seem to have the previous one still up. All right, that's good. All right, councillors, please cast your votes. And that was unanimous. Thank you, councillors. Okay, that's the end of item 12. Item 13 is questions from members. Item 13.1 is responses to previous questions from members taken on notice. That's nil this evening. Item 13.2 is questions from members. Are there any questions from members this evening? Councillor Choi.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Let me just get to my notes there. This is regarding the development on 74 Mill Point Road, which has been subject to a number of emails over the past week, which I'm sure the relevant officers are aware of. So I'm just wanting to confirm the process and procedure for residents accessing their construction management plan. I understand they may be able to inspect it. I just want to get some confirmation around that and how that availability of those documents are being communicated to residents, because I believe, and maybe Councillor Coveney can confirm this, that we are receiving quite a few requests for it. So I'm just wondering if there's something can be put out there for residents generally in that area to receive or contact the city about.
Ms Shaw, can I send that in your direction?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. So we receive construction management plans typically as part of the building permit application or where it's a condition of development approval. So for the Lumiere development that you're referring to, we have received an initial construction management plan, and after it's been reviewed and approved by the city, we do make those available to the residents to view. So we have provided a copy to the local residents in that respect, and as the subsequent stages of the development occur and we receive additional construction management plans, the residents will be able to view those plans. In general, in terms of access to plans, given they're the intellectual property of the landowner and the applicant, we don't typically provide electronic copies of those documents, but the public are able to come into the office and inspect the documents.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillors, any further questions this evening? Councillor Credland.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've had raised with me a matter that I'm not aware of, and that's in respect of the entry to, you go down Kent Street, you cross Manning Road.
I think I know the one you're talking about, the entry into Waterford at Waterford Avenue at the corner of Manning, Kent and Waterford.
Exactly that. Apparently there's been some change on the left or something to the fence. And I was asked whether I would just ask council whether or not that was a council change or where it's come from or what the city officers know about it.
I assume that's the erection of the Colorbond fences on the lot there. Yes. Ms Shaw?
Oh, yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the corner there, even from the street, it probably looks like it's part of the verge, but that's actually a residential lot. And so the landowner has erected the Colorbond fence as a boundary fence around the property, and as a result, it's removed visibility of the entry statement signage that the original developer had installed to the entry to the estate. So they are entitled to install the Colorbond fence in that location.
So the entry location statement was put on someone's land.
Yes, that's correct.
That's a bit of a whoopsie, isn't it? Had a follow-up question from a question I asked last month, and this would be to the acting CEO, Director of Infrastructure Services, and that was in respect of how the council had set aside $50,000 in this year's budget for drainage works in respect of Gardner Street, out the front of 53 Gardner Street, because it had flooding in previous winters, and the residents had to clean out the city drains. Now, I had, at the last council meeting, I asked whether or not those works had been undertaken and completed, and I think Miss Anne Primo said she was going to get back to me about that. At least that's what's in the minutes. I couldn't find anything in my email, so I'm just wondering whether or not I could get some advice on that one.
Ms Anne Primo?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Apologies, Councillor Cribland. We did minor maintenance intervention, which we believe has resolved the issue, and we will continue to monitor the situation. And we don't believe that any further capital works at this time would change the situation there. So we'll just continue to monitor it and make sure the works that we have done are effective.
Thank you, Ms Anne Primo. Councillors, any further? Councillor Choi.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just that property on Gwenifred, on the corner of Gwenifred and Canning Highway, can we maybe receive an update as to when the demolition might be happening there? Because it's a real eyesore, and I keep getting residents asking me about it. The one that's all fenced up, I think, on the corner of, I think Miss Mellon knows about it.
Ms Mullen?
Thank you, through the chair. I'm aware of the site, thank you, but we don't have an update, unfortunately, on the day for demolition. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Mullen. Any further questions, councillors? No. Okay. That brings us to item 14, which is new business of an urgent nature, introduced by decision of the meeting. That's nil for this evening. And item 15 is when the meeting is to be closed to the public. And we do have one item that needs to be dealt with confidentially. So to those who are listening via YouTube, we're going to have to bid you adieu, at least temporarily, but thank you for listening. Councillors, I'm moving a motion that we go on to item 15.1, for which the meeting must be closed. So I'm moving a motion that the meeting be closed to the public. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Choi, thank you. Councillors, please cast your votes on a motion that the meeting be closed. Or rather, that we go behind closed doors, I should say. But that was unanimous, so thank you. All right, so I'll just confirm with governance that we're offline and we're not... We are? Brilliant. Okay. All right. So that brings us to item 16, which is closure. But before I close tonight's meeting, I'd like to thank everyone for their attendance and participation. I declare the meeting closed at 8:45 p.m. Thank you all and good night.